Welcome to this another opportunity to share with you from Life Application Spiritual Truth. Give us a thumbs up, post a positive comment about our program, like our page, subscribe to our channel, and share this link in all of your social media. We appreciate you taking this journey with us, and we trust that this journey will be beneficial, that it will bless you, and it will bless those whom you share it with. We have been talking about the family, and we have gotten into that point where we're talking about husbands and wives. This is rich material. You can't handle that much of it, so our sessions will be short. But on our last time, we talked about love, and I gave you a definition of what love is. Love is an attitude and an action that is caused by a need, but it is regulated by relationship and resources. If you miss that definition and the biblical support for it, please go on to our YouTube channel and get the earlier presentation. And that definition is, biblically documented, supported, and illustrated so you can really capture that idea. And so we've come to the point where husbands love your wives. But the question comes up, how do I express love? How long has it been since you have said to a person, oh, I didn't mean any harm by that? Why would you say that? You said something, and there's a possibility that the person that you spoke about or the person you spoke to, there is a great possibility that they misunderstood your purpose for saying such. They misunderstood your motive. So it can be true with love. We may intend to do something out of love, but it may actually be the opposite. It was said that a woman saw a car rolling down the street, and the door was open, and there was no person sitting behind the steering wheel. The lady ran over to the car, slid into the seat, put her foot on the brake, and stopped the car. Put the car in park, jumped out of the car, and about that time, a man stood up, and she looked at him and said, I stopped it. He said, I know you did. I was pushing it. The man was trying to get his car to the filling station, a little piece down the street. She intended good, but because there was information she did not know, her action really was not good. And that can be true with love. We may want or intend to do something for love, and it may end up really not being love. It isn't love just because you want it to be. And it isn't love just because you say it's love. It is love because God says it's love. Because this love thing started with God. We love him. Why? Because he first loved us. And then he told us to go love one another the way he has loved us. So we don't get a chance to decide what love is. The husband doesn't get a chance to decide that. God's already said something about that. So husband, how do I express love for the wife? Pay close attention. First, a husband, love your wife with a substance of love. Write that word down, substance. Love your wife with a substance of love. We'll talk about some other basis in which we find husbands attempting to love their wives. But first, we want to talk about husband, love your wife with a substance of love. Substance is the foundational essential within. We're talking about the real essence of love. It's a substance of love. For example, you eat food because of the nutritions that's in the food. If you eat food and there are no nutritions there, it will do your body no good. It really isn't food if there are no nutritions. It really isn't love if there isn't a substance to it. So when we talk about substance, we're talking about the foundational, essential part that is within that husband-wife relationship. Stay with us. We're going to make it even clearer. Love your wife with a substance of love by giving up of yourself. This is the husband's assignment. I said to you last time, many husbands do not know how to love their wives. And many wives don't have a clue how God wants their husband to love them. Many wives have run off down into left field, having concocted and created in their mind what they think love is and what their expectations for their husband is, but that has absolutely nothing to do with love as God so have defined it. And when you misunderstand the substance of love as God so instructed, then you will be joining in with Tina when she sings, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" When you understand the substance of love, when you understand that love is the foundation, or the substance rather, is the foundational essential within. And when you understand that husbands love their wives with a substance of love by giving up of yourselves, you will never ask the question, what's love got to do with it? Love has everything to do with it. So husband, love your wife with a substance of love by giving up of yourself. Now let's explore this idea of giving up. I want to make sure that you are crystal clear. But I not only want to make sure that you're crystal clear, but I want to make sure that you see the biblical support for the very idea of giving up. Okay? Now watch the text carefully. Christ gave himself up for the church. Now, what God does, he takes marriage between a man and a woman to illustrate Christ's relationship with the church. Christ has the church as his bride. So God has chosen to use the marriage relationship between a husband and a wife to illustrate the relationship between Christ and the church. So we can't just create any kind of marriage dynamic that we want. I know it is becoming popular for a man to have two wives and two wives, or one wife to have two husbands, or group. That's not acceptable. That's not consistent. So God has chosen marriage, and our marriage must model the relationship between Christ and the church. Now let's notice what that Christ and the church relationship is. Christ gave himself up. For the church, Christ gave himself up into death. He gave himself up into death. Now, watch the text carefully in Ephesians 5 and verse 25. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Christ gave himself up for the church. He is modeling what husbands must do for their wives. So, husbands, how do you express your love for your wife? By giving yourself up. By giving yourself up. Now, I want to make sure you understand what this idea of giving yourself up is really all about. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you now that most wives, well, I will be a little more politically correct and say many wives, and if you pull my chain, I'll go back to most, do not want their husbands to love them. You heard me exactly correct. So you will make no mistake about it. I'm going to say it 2 more times. Many wives, and if you pull my chain, I'll tell you most wives do not want their husbands to love them. Many wives do not want their husbands to love them. They want their husbands to give them some things, do some things for them, leave them alone, and that may have absolutely nothing to do with love, as God has given us love. Christ gave himself up for the church, and that is the model by which husbands must love their wives. When Christ gave himself up for the church, what did he intend to accomplish? What was that all about? What did he intend to do? Let's see. The death of Jesus adds value to the church. That's what he intended to do. He gave himself up so that he could add value, so the church would become a worthwhile organism. He wanted to add value. Now let's go a little further. What did he intend to accomplish specifically? How will that value come? He intended to accomplish sanctification. That's what Christ wanted to accomplish when he gave himself up for the church. Look at the latter part of Ephesians 5 and verse 26. So that he might sanctify her. That's why Christ gave himself up for the church, that he might sanctify the church, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word. Now that's baptism. When you're baptized into Christ in water, at the direction of the word of God. Now, many people don't understand how important it is and how essential it is for one to be baptized, because that's when the cleansing, forgiveness, the washing away of sin, not like soap and water, but it is the obedience of heart to the word. And one carries out that obedience by surrendering to baptism. And when that takes place, now people say, I don't understand why you need a ceremony. Well, every marriage has some kind of ceremony. You can never become married, even if it's a matter of you jumping the broomstick, even if it's a matter of you looking in a person's eye and said, I want to be married to you, or whatever the case. That's some type of ceremony. So one is never born again without some type of ceremony, and that ceremony must be a ceremony that God authorized. So what did Christ intend to accomplish? He intended to accomplish sanctification. Well, what is sanctification? Internal purity for the church. That's why Christ gave himself up, so that he could have a church that radiated internal purity. Let's go even further. Christ intended to and did accomplish not only sanctification, but glorification. Now, sanctification is the internal purity for the church. Glorification is the external beauty that's radiating from the internal purity of the church. So you cannot have glorification without sanctification. So the internal purity expresses itself through external beauty of behavior. Now look at Ephesians 5 and verse 27. That he might present to himself the church in all glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So what did Jesus intend to accomplish when he gave himself up for the church? He intended to accomplish sanctification and glorification. Now, Christ gave as much, he gave up as much pleasure, he gave up as much privacy as was necessary to bring about the sanctification and the glorification of the church. Now, notice that Christ gave up as much as was necessary to ensure, to make sure that the church could experience sanctification and glorification. Now, that's what Christ intended to accomplish when he gave himself up for the church. Now, because the marriage illustrates the husband, rather, the husband marriage illustrates visibly and physically for us the spiritual and intangible relationship between Christ and the church. But we're not ready for marriage. We're not ready to look at husbands and wives until we first look at Christ and the church. Do you know that many people have gotten married and they had no idea about Christ and his church? No wonder then our marriages are so far away from what God ultimately intended. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to review this and look at that relationship between Christ and the church. Christ gave himself up for the sanctification and the glorification of the church. He had a purpose in mind for giving himself up. And we'll look next time at how should that impact the husband and wife relationship. How does it do that? What does that say? How does that speak to the husband and wife relationship? If you have become married and you didn't study the book of Ephesians, you have not studied Christ and his relationship to the church, then you, my friend, are ill prepared for marriage. And may I tell you that most all of us are ill prepared. So parents and churches, we've got to start teaching people the relationship between Christ and the church so that we will understand what the marriage relationship is all about. It's been a pleasure sharing with you. Like our page, post a positive comment, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share the link in your social media. Now, on the next occasion, we're going to apply this sanctification and glorification and say, what does that really mean? And how does a husband give himself up for his wife? What does that really mean? It's going to be a wonderful experience. You do not want to miss it. You cannot afford to miss it. We'll